Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for yet another session on a very important topic when it comes to cybersecurity in the education space. This is our Hack to School session. We're going to be talking about a lot of really important things. Uh, we're going to start out with what's happening with our schools and campuses. We're going to discuss some tricks that actually work to defend our information from attackers, and we're going to provide you with a bunch of resources to help you make yourselves a harder target for cyber criminals and to secure your systems and data so you can sleep well at night. Uh, we got a lot of material to cover, so we're going to move through this relatively quickly. Just a quick kind of rundown on what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at what we're seeing this school year. We're going to look at threat snapshots. What's really happening in the education space? We're seeing more attacks against schools. We're seeing attackers try to learn about how schools work and what we do as a core business and attacking those things. And of course, we're going to readdress some tried and true methods that they use, which still unfortunately work. So we're going to take that quick threat snapshot. We're going to talk about why schools are a favorite target for cyber bad guys. We're going to cover 8 smart defenses that actually move the needle when it comes to cybersecurity. So actionable things that you can do to make yourselves a harder target, protect your systems and your data against these sorts of cyber attacks. We're going to cover incident response basics, right? What to do when things go bump in the night. We're going to talk about specifically some things about vendors and privacy practices. As more and more of our school infrastructure and services are being outsourced to vendors, we're going to talk about some best practices that you can use to reduce risks. And finally, we're going to cover what we like to call a 30, 60, 90-day action plan, which will allow you to really sort of operationalize cybersecurity, to move that needle incrementally, to get you positioned to be more resilient to attacks, more resistant to attacks. And in the event that one is unfortunately successful, you'll be much better placed to respond quickly and efficiently to that. So without further ado, let's give you a quick pop quiz. All right, we'll do a little bit of a pulse check here. We're not going to hold you to this. We're just going to raise a couple of things. We want to keep the answers to these questions in your mind because we're going to harken back to this as we sort of move through the rest of this session. So in your head, put a little check mark if you've seen a fish in the last month that name dropped your superintendent or your dean or someone in your organization, right? Either masquerading as that person or maybe it's a mail saying, "Hey, I talked to so and so and they said to do this." So if you've seen one of those things, then hey, they clearly know your org chart, right? So put a little checkbox next to that. If you happen to be in the business of an MFA rollout, if your rollout has been temporarily sort of relocated to the pilot phase, right? Again, this is not uncommon. These are hard things to do, right? MFA is a non-trivial thing to incorporate, but a lot of times organizations have a lot of stutter steps, right? Where they're trying to launch MFA, but something happens or some sort of bump in the road temporarily sort of derails that effort, right? So if that's happened to you or your organization, put a check mark there in your brain because we're gonna talk about how some of these things can really affect our threat posture, right? So again, last one here. You've had a backup that you've actually restored in the last 90 days, right? Give yourself a point, right? If you've had a backup you've actually restored in the last 90 days, then that's great, right? If you found your first day one win for increasing your cybersecurity preparedness, right? A lot of organizations, it's kind of common knowledge and common practice to have this kind of structured backup in place. But a lot of organizations fail when it comes to the other end of the backups, right? Yes, we back up our stuff, whatever that might be, but we've never actually tried to restore our stuff from the backups. right? So by getting into a habit of recurrently, so going back and trying to restore something from backups. Just pick something randomly, or a representative subset of your backups, and restore them to make sure that your backups are viable, right? There's nothing worse than being in the middle of a ransomware incident or something of that nature, and suddenly you find out that you can't restore your backups. Right. So if you've had that, if you've done a restoration in the last 90 days, that's great. You're already ahead of the curve. Right. So keep the answers to these questions in your back pocket, because we're going to talk about things like things about these quiz questions when we're talking about phishing and social engineering, when we're talking about best practices for your vendors, and when we get into building that 30, 60, 90 plan, we're going to harken back to these questions and where you are as an organization, right? So I want to reiterate that as we go through today, a lot of folks get trapped in this thought that we have to be secure. It's all about, perfection, and while it's, obviously we want to aim for for that perfection, but the goal is not perfection, right? You're never gonna reach that. It's about progress that you can start right now, right? If your goal is perfection, then you're going to wait forever to start, because there's no way you're going to reach the destination. So it's not about reaching perfection. It's about breaking that down into manageable, incremental things that you can do starting right now to make yourself a harder target. So let's look a little bit about where we are this year, right? We're talking about headaches you can feel, right? It's the things that actually happen to schools. Um, it's ransomware, right? It's up year over year, demands hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes even into seven figures, depending on the size of the impact and the school's resources. Um, We're seeing increased targeting by these sophisticated cyber criminal groups against K-12. Thousands and thousands of events and confirmed incidents rather across an 18-month window. It's a clear indication that we are no longer sort of hidden in the noise, right? We are a favorite food source for the internet's apex predators. More concerning than that is we're starting to see these attackers where at first they just targeted schools. But like other industries that have felt the ire of these sophisticated groups, they have attempted to start changing their models and learn about how schools work, right? And so we're starting to see them time attacks to areas where there is most likely going to be some success, or where they might cause the most disruption, right? So we're seeing this sort of adaptation to the way schools work and understanding of the education community and how schools, work throughout the school year. And they're adapting their attacks to take advantage of weak points that they see. And that's concerning, right? Because that means we can expect to see more attacks, and along with that, more successful attacks. So a lot of folks ask, why in the world are schools being targeted by cyber attackers? We don't have huge amounts of money or products, or we're not a financial institution. We're not the federal government. We're not the military. We're not some big retailer. So why in the world would a bad guy attack a school district or a small university or anything like that? Well, the answers to that are kind of manyfold, but it breaks down into a couple of big points, right? Schools have a big attack surface, a whole lot of users, right? Many devices, many vendors, many devices that are internet facing, right? So there's a lot of things for hackers to get a hold of in the education community. When we're talking about, especially in the post-secondary world, there's a lot of decentralized IT. A lot of these different schools within the university might have, their own IT systems. They may have a host of legacy systems that are still online, especially, if we're talking about SIS and finance, things that have a lot of personally identifiable information, for example. Um, that may linger and may be co-located with other systems that are weak. We have a ton of data that matters, right? We have a lot of personally identifiable information about our students, about our employees. In some cases, especially in the higher ed world, you may have sensitive research projects or intellectual property that's being developed with the university in partnerships. You have a lot of data. We're not just schools. We're also, in some cases, financial institutions. Collections. We're big employers, and we've got a lot of information, not just for current students, but past students as well. Sometimes hundreds of thousands of people's information might be hidden within the totality of a school's networks and systems. And like many organizations, we are faced with things like retention problems, getting and keeping skilled cyber practitioners, and limited budgets, right? Nobody has an unlimited amount of money they can spend on securing their data and systems, right? So at the end of the day, it leads to an asymmetric fight, right? The bad guys know exactly where we are and what our world looks like. They get to choose when they attack, and we have limited resources and people power to fight against them. And so that leads to an area where the attackers have some advantages, and that is why they choose to point their weapons at schools, right? Because we are, unfortunately, in many cases, easy targets for them to attack. So let's talk about three of the most common headaches associated with cyber attacks against schools. Um, Most of these hacks are going to start as conversations. They're going to start as a social engineering attack through a phishing email or some sort of email compromise that convinces other people to take actions. It might come in the form of text messages. It could even come as phone calls, especially as we start talking about how AI is influencing the cyber threat. You may even get deep fakes around voices or videos, which make and compound those social engineering attacks and making them more deadly and more successful. You may find something as easy as a QR code, right? That asks you to hurry up and take care of these things. To play on your emotions and get you to take action. Most successful attacks in cybersecurity have some form of social engineering to start them, right? So we're going to see phishing and credential theft and ransomware as kind of the big first headaches, right? And there's a couple of things that come out of that, right? You can get all kinds of issues around loss of credentials, compromise of credentials. Sometimes you don't realize that that login screen you were forwarded is not a legitimate login screen, and you lose your information that way. When we're talking about ransomware, oftentimes phishing or some form of credential theft is sort of the first attack that happens. That enables them to then further install or deploy their ransomware, right? And some of the downsides of that, obviously, ransomware can cripple your systems, can take down your networks. It can render your student information system or your registrar systems inoperable. It can many times we're seeing that schools simply can't operate with these critical systems down. And it can cause all kinds of problems with as far as getting kids to school or even something as simple as producing transcripts. right? So ransomware, phishing, credential theft, these are kind of the big ones. We have vendor and supply chain issues, right? This is increasingly a problem that is facing us here in the education space. We have a lot of our services and a lot of our systems and platforms are being outsourced to vendors, to cloud service providers, and that sort of thing, which can sometimes put our data at risk, right? So attackers may not necessarily be attacking our systems directly. They may attack one of your vendors, right? Where it's your data, but it's somebody else's, cyber attack that corrupts your data, or, worse yet, leaks your data or ransoms your data. And lastly, it's misconfigurations. Everybody, none of us are perfect. Everybody makes mistakes, and in the education space, we have our share of miscommunications around how systems are supposed to be set up. For example, it's easy to miss one of those check boxes that says, "Hey, we're going to turn off directory browsing in this web server," or we're going to we forget to set a security option in the configuration file, which means now that share is available to the entire internet, right? These things happen. We try to limit it to the degree that we can, but as I said, no one's perfect, and once in a while, one of these things is going to happen, right? And so it behooves us to recognize this threat and to take actions to routinely scan for these types of misconfigurations. We're going to talk a lot about that in the slides to come, so I won't bore you with that right now, but we wanted to just kind of set the table when we talk about the most common things that affect us here in the education space. And now we're going to talk about how we can mitigate some of those things. The first one we're going to touch on is ransomware. Ransomware is probably one of the biggest threats facing schools today, right? If there's a ransomware attack happening somewhere in America, there's a pretty good, probably better than even odds that it's happening at a school district or a post-secondary institution, right? We're that much of a target for these cyber bad guys. As I mentioned, schools are big, busy neighborhoods, right? They have lots of accounts, they have lots of vendors, you have lots of data, lots of times that's segmented and blasted out into various parts of your network. Ransomware most often starts as phishing or some sort of outdated software, right? We see those as being sort of that initial toehold that these groups use in order to get their ransomware into your environment and spread it around. So one of the, a few things that you need to have to combat this, obviously, is a lot of training and having some good security basics in place. So to kind of tell you where we are with ransomware, I mentioned that it is one of the biggest threats, if not the biggest threat, facing schools. If we look at the first half of 2025, we see about a 23% increase over the previous year. Right, that's 23% year over year. As you can notice, that describes a pretty exponential curve, right? And that means that attackers are not only focusing more on education, but they are almost exclusively focusing on education. We're seeing a lot of increase, 23% year over year. And as I alluded to before, they're timing campaigns around registration and term starts because, obviously these attacks are aimed at extortion. Right, so they want to cause disruption during times that hurt you the most as a school. Here's a good example for K-12. This unfortunately happened in Connecticut. Security tools flagged an attempt to encrypt district systems on July 24th. The team took the network offline, staged recovery, communicated publicly while investigating. This group, calling itself SafePay, later threatened to leak some data. This is what it looks like, folks. Right? It happens quickly, and even though the team successfully took the network offline and did a recovery, and even though they were very upfront, the group still threatened to leak a lot of their data if the ransom wasn't paid. So even though it didn't take down their systems and keep them down, they still got ransomed for the 90 gigs of data that criminal group was able to get a hold of while they were in the systems. This is an example of that double extortion that happens so often in the K-12 space. All right. If we look into the higher ed world, universities, they face the same playbook with a little extra complexity, right? Uh, because of the nature of most of higher ed, you have a lot of decentralized IT, right? You have research networks, you have different schools within the university that have different levels of autonomy. And they have different calendars to collide with, right? When orientation is, when your deadlines for adding or dropping classes, when financial aid deadlines are approaching, right? These are things, times and windows for bad guys to take action. Um, and we see similar trends in the post-secondary world as we do in the K-12 world, right? Year-over-year rises, targeting colleges and universities just as well as we see down there in the school districts. So there's no real difference in the threat between the K-12 and post-secondary space. And it's important to realize that although this is an extortion attempt, right, the real hard part is downtime, right? If you have to send students home, in the K-12 space, that is a huge inconvenience, and you are going to certainly damage your relationship with the community if you can't hold classes because of a cyber attack, right? And the longer that goes on, the more that relation is damaged, right? And in the post-secondary world, that often that is a direct line to to being incredibly financially expensive, right? So this can happen to any organization, whether you're in the K-12 or post-secondary space. And even if you block the encryption, right? Even if you stop the systems from being brought down for an extended period of time, schools often react by taking your own systems down just to be safe, just to make sure that nothing will happen to those systems, right? So a lot of times, schools will be so quick on the draw that they will stop the attack. But in the process of validating that the attack is actually stopped, they will take other systems down. So it's almost inevitable that you will have some sort of downtime associated with these attacks, and that still hurts your schedules. That still could cancel classes. That still could damage your reputation with your community and ultimately set you back quite a ways, right? And so what we're talking about today, when we're talking about the best practices and some of the tools that you can use to reduce your risk, again, the goal isn't perfect security, right? Because that doesn't exist. What's secure today, 20 minutes from now, someone will find a bug, someone will find a vulnerability, and we're back to square one, right? So it's about implementing best practices and having a very predictable recovery strategy in place so that when the inevitable happens, you can quickly determine what happened, stop it from spreading, and then get back to business. So how do we win against ransomware? What we don't need is magic devices and that sort of thing. What we need is muscle memory. We need training. We need to have the ability to recognize, respond, and remediate the attack in a quick and effective manner. So in the first hour is all about containment. Right? As soon as you identify that something is amiss, disable accounts, isolate affected devices. You want to make sure you preserve evidence. Have a plan in there that you're not wiping systems immediately. Make sure that you preserve evidence to the degree that you can, and most importantly, communicate. Right? You need some plain English communications. No acronym-filled things. Avoid this speculation or anything. What you want is something very, very generic, like, hey, we've had an incident. We're investigating currently. We will be containing the situation, restoring our systems back to operating states, and we'll provide more info at say noon tomorrow. Right? You establish that communication, let them know that you are investigating, and you establish a cadence where more information can be expected. Right? In that first day, you're going to be focused on containing the incident, getting back to a place where you can bring up your identity and your email, right? Because without that, nothing else works. Then get your critical systems, your student information, registrar systems, the things that you need in order to be able to function, and then worry about things like phones and payroll and other things that can be brought up later on in the process, right? And in between these incidents, we use that time to improve our situation, right? To make sure that our offline backups work and that we can restore them in the case that we need to. We can do things like look to put multi-factor authentication on important services, things like email, implementing a VPN or a virtual private network for your organization, so that when you leave the campus, when you're in the airport or at a coffee shop or even at home, doing sensitive things, that you are encrypting that data so that it isn't being eavesdropped on or stolen en route. To make sure that your VPN, sys, and vendor administrative accounts have this multi-factor authentication enabled. Right? Sometimes it's a pain, but you're going to reap a lot of benefits by enabling multi-factor, especially at a bare minimum on these administrative accounts that have such tremendous powers in these systems. And you want to make sure that you focus on patching your internet systems first, anything that faces the internet, and make sure you keep your critical systems like your sys, like your student aid systems, on different virtual hallways than student devices or guest Wi-Fi. Right? It's a request to go ahead and diversify, to segregate your networks into these different enclaves that have different risk levels, keeping those core critical systems in secure, separate enclaves from non-critical systems like student devices, dorms, guest Wi-Fi, etc. One of the other things, phishing, right? That's attacks rarely start with some sort of direct technical attack, and they somehow hack through your firewalls and get access to your critical systems. Right? It rarely starts that. Far more likely, it started with an email uh, that went to one of your staff members. Right? Then they read the email, assumed that it was legitimate, and took some action. Right? That could be, as simple as a vendor calling with a an update saying, hey, our system's updated. We have a different banking info now for when you pay this invoice. Here's the new bank info. Or maybe that a fake email from HR that says they need your W-2, or maybe you get something that is a little easier to spot, like the dean urgently requesting gift cards for a going away party or something like that, right? And it could be a text or a QR code on a flyer that's in the hallway. Some sort of prompt that you get on your phone, right? One rushed click, one misclick, or just absentmindedly clicking on or assumption that this email is legitimate can do horrible things like reroute payroll, open up a mailbox, allow someone access to your email, or in worst cases, things like hand over your student information system credentials by presenting a false login screen or something of that nature. Right? It's for schools, phishing is not about the hackers having some sort of crazy coding ability and the ability to walk through your firewalls and that sort of things. It's more about tricking users. It's about establishing solid habits, to establishing a healthy a distrust of things that they receive in email and through their devices, not necessarily something that you can simply mitigate by buying hardware or software and putting it in place, right? It's mostly about addressing the human issue. So in a lot of ways, the hackers are less interested in writing some sort of zero-day code to get access to your systems. Instead, they're going to spend time kind of working like a private investigator, studying your website, your staff directory calendars, that sort of thing. Maybe they get someone to click a link and they get a copy of those credentials, or they see a bunch of email coming through and they hijack legitimate threads and pretend to be that vendor and say, hey, according to this invoice, you're behind, you need to pay, or something of this nature, right? It could be something like adding a QR code to avoid filters, right? Because your spam filters maybe don't filter out QR codes, and that QR code will automatically take you to some nefarious site with malicious intent, right? Or perhaps they flood your phone with multi-factor authentication prompts, right? MFA is great, but if your phone keeps popping up with that message that says, "Hey, will you allow this? Hey, will you allow this?" Eventually, you're going to get tired and hit yes, whatever, just go away, right? And you hit that button, and you may not necessarily realize that you may have just given a hacker access to your systems or your email. Right? None of the things that we talked about requires elite hacking skills, right? It's just good timing and human persuasion, the ability to prey on your human instincts. Right? The antidote here, of course, is super boring, right? It's getting people to slow down, to take a second look at things, right? To make sure that whoever called them called from a number that they know to be that company. Or to be okay with simply not complying with something they get in email, right? Um, the rule of thumb here, if it has to happen right now, it can't wait a few minutes for a callback, and it's demanding, super urgency right now. Then it's probably not real. It's probably somebody trying to get you to act without thinking. So slow down and double think before you click or before you take action based on that. So let's talk about some things we can do to make ourselves harder phishing targets, right? Um, we can put in place some sort of safety nets. If we're talking about money moves, we're talking about accounts payable, that sort of stuff, you can put in place a policy that says, hey, you're not allowed to change anything with regard to banking information or financial information or wire any money without some sort of confirmation. Maybe it's a known telephone number, or maybe it's a confirmation to a specific email or some sort of pre-established validation code or something of this nature. But build into your process some sort of double check, right? So that a very convincing AI-powered phishing email doesn't convince someone to wire money. A great example, just about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, it was a huge incident that occurred where a company was duped out of millions of dollars, and the CFO of that company was present in a board meeting where that person was the only live individual in the meeting. Everyone else was an artificial intelligence generated person whom that person recognized and apparently thought was real enough that when they directed him to send that money, he did. Now, if we look into things for like login security to protect your credentials, right? Implementing a multi-factor authentication everywhere that you can is going to reap a lot of benefits, right? Whether it's just staff email, whether it's for your VPN or your student information system, or vendor accounts, or anything that requires a user to authenticate to that system. Consider a multi-factor approach to that. All right? And you want to build a culture that says, within your organization, it's okay to deny a weird prompt, right? To teach folks that it's okay if the little hair on the back of your neck stands up and you think, well, this is odd. Something about this doesn't feel right. It's okay to just not click OK. And for email, it's training people, whether that's enabling things like external tags that mark emails that come from outside the organization with a big external mark, so that people know that, hey, this email from the superintendent looks like it came from outside the organization, so I'm going to be very suspicious of this. You could a lot of organizations are putting report phish buttons. They're either buying software to do it or they're creating their own solutions, but they add ways for users to quickly say, hey, I think this is a phishing message, and forward that to the appropriate folks within the organization so they can check it and make sure that it is that it's legitimate or is in fact a phishing message. And routinely check, right, to make sure that a compromise of an email account hasn't resulted in some sort of auto forward rules that are somehow leaking information out of your organization in a surreptitious way, where a person may not have realized that someone accessed their account and set up an auto forward rule. These are the kinds of pretty simple to do things that will, one, enable you to detect an attack quicker, and will deter a lot of these sort of entry-level attacks where people are wiring money without verification or using compromised passwords, etc. And we mentioned it a little bit before, but we're going to talk about it again. AI is on everybody's mind, right? Everybody's talking about AI. It's kind of one of those new buzzwords, and everybody's like, oh no, AI is going to change the entire world with regard to cyber threat. And it really hasn't done that, and it's not going to do that. Sure, it's going to give bad operators new toys to use. It's going to give them more effective tools, but it isn't going to change the underlying math, right? It's going to increase their efficacy around things like social engineering attacks, right? Phishing messages are going to now really sound like they came from your district, right? It may reference your calendar or even mimic a person's actual writing tone, right? So that there's no misspellings or sort of odd English that might tip you off that this is some bad actor or a fake email. Further than that, deep faking voices can sound a lot like your actual coworkers, right? So you may get a phone call. It sounds like your dean or sounds like your district superintendent, right? So how do you detect that? And again, we mentioned QR codes and posters and that sort of thing that slip through the security filters. It's a heck of a lot easier to generate those sorts of sort of technical workarounds with the help of AI. But these are still the same threats, just put on a little bit of steroids by the fact that AI can make them a little bit more effective and a lot quicker for the bad guys to implement. The core risks here are the same, right? Credential theft, social engineering, those are the big ones. They just now have more tools and they have convincing voices, right? So how do we win against things like AI? Verifying phone numbers, right? Do you know that this is not this person's number, right? Have you ever called that number before, right? Make sure you circulate to your staff. Hey, if you don't feel right about it, you get a weird prompt, or you get an odd phone call or a text, or something happens, you just don't feel right about it. It's okay to say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And then report it to the proper folks within the organization, and then trace that down, right? That is okay. That's desirable in an organization because it reduces your risk of someone feeling like, well, I have to say yes to this, or well, they need it right now. They need it in 5 minutes. I need to, I need to send that. Right? Well, take a step, think about it, maybe validate some other way, and then if it's legitimate, answer that email in the 5 minutes. Requiring MFA, multi-factor authentication, again, will save you from a lot of peril with regard to compromised credentials and social engineering, right? But implement number matching or device code prompts, right? You want to make sure that you're using phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. You want to block legacy mail protocols, right? Look for sneaky configuration changes like auto forward rules popping up. Those are an indicator of attacks or malicious activity going on, and certainly probably violate your organization's policies. For communications around this, script and impersonation playbook, right? Build tools that allow users to spot fake calls, right? When they get a feeling like something here isn't right, do they know who to escalate that to? And who in the organization is authorized to say, nope, that's okay, you can do that. And for your own AI tools, when you're using the AI as part of your daily life, right? Set a do or don't list. Send it out to your staff. Say, hey, when you're using AI, don't put any personally identifiable or FERPA protected data into these consumer AI bots, right? Use approved AI that's organization managed, right? Coach staff on things like prompt injection red flags when they're, for example, copying and pasting to the web. Is there some text in that copy and paste that is the same color as the background so people don't see it? Or, just to kind of fill them in on some of the new vulnerabilities that happen as a result of this sort of these AI specific threats. Let's talk a little bit about vendors here. When someone else's oops becomes your emergency, right? We all have vendors. Whether it's your student information system, learning platforms, payment portals, etc. We have a ton of systems that run on someone else's servers, right? But they're running with our data, right? So the catch here is that when the vendor slips up, when they are the victim of an attack, your families get the email, but it's your phones that ring and your name that's sitting on the letter, right? So supply chain incidents, they don't always hack your network. They're hacking your, vendors, your service providers, right? But you're going to be the focus of the ire from parents and students in your ecosystem, right? And with our vendors, for example, if your sys vendor falls under attack and shuts down operations for a period of time, right, can your school deal with the sort of ripple effects of that? Can you still conduct classes? Can you still, hold, can you still transport kids? Can you run your cafeteria if these sorts of systems go down? And secondarily, and probably more importantly, if that data is compromised, are you exposing your students or your staff to possible harm like identity theft, right? And even though your systems may have been perfect and infallible and nothing happened on systems that you maintain, because you trusted that vendor and the vendor got attacked, you're still on the hook. So vendor risks, we see, there are a lot of ways in which vendors can add risk that isn't necessarily accounted for when you're considering the outsourcing. It could be something like your vendor's vendor, right? In recent months, there's been attacks on large education vendors where, the education vendor itself really wasn't the issue, but it was a contractor for that vendor, right? That had some, non-compliant account management processes, which resulted in sort of a cascade effect, right? That compounds down and ultimately affects the school. And in a case of a vendor, it could affect thousands or tens of thousands of schools. So things to look for, right? When you're writing your written agreements, when you're agreeing to outsource these services, here's some things to look for with your vendors. Multi-factor, of course, right? Do they support multi-factor authentication? Do they have logs that you can go back to and reference, right? If there's something going on, do they have sufficient log retention so that you can go back in time and see what happened or what information might have been impacted? Are there service level agreements around breach notification, right? If the vendor has a problem, is there a time frame in which they have to notify you of that problem? Look for those service level agreements, right? Because if this is FERPA protected data, that could be hugely problematic for the school. So make sure that you have some sort of assurance that, hey, if the vendor has a breach, if the vendor has something go wrong with their systems, an attack, etc., that you will be notified in a acceptable amount of time? Right? Are they transparent about their subcontractors, the partners that they work with to provide the service that you're contracting for? Um, what are their data retention practices? What are their data deletion timelines, right? If you say, for example, you terminate services with that cloud provider out there, how long does your data stay in their systems before it gets completely gone? And we're not talking about online, but also things like backups that may linger for some time after the data should have been gone. Does it support single sign-on for access? Can you federate that with your own systems? Um, do they have practices and principles in place like data minimization by default, right? So that you only collect data that is needed and not ancillary data or just a whole bunch of, the default of give me all your data, right? Because if a breach occurs, data minimization lessens the impact by reducing the data elements that are available for the bad guys to access. Do you have the appropriate controls in place? If someone calls the district or calls your school and claims to be this cloud provider, how do you validate that? Right? Do you have some sort of authentication practices in place so that if there's some communications, you can validate that they came from the actual vendor and are not some sort of phishing or social engineering attack? And think about including your vendors in your tabletop exercises. When you're working through your incident response process, include these third parties in it if you can, right? Inquire, can we tie you into this exercise that we're having? We'll call you with exercise inputs and that sort of thing. That way it builds that line of communication and you get sort of the engagement of that third party. So see if you can do that. Let's talk a little bit about misconfigurations. This is something that is rather common in the education space. It's kind of the digital version of forgetting to lock your door, right? Um, in schools, we see it's a lot of shared drives that are inadvertently a bad permissions management. They're inadvertently readable to the world. Mailboxes that are auto forwarding off domain. And a lot of vendors that have access that exceeds what they need in order to do whatever that purpose is, right? So people just check super user on that outside vendor's account because, well, it's just for the rollout, or we're not sure exactly what permissions they need, so we'll just give them all the permissions, right? So a lot of it is around forgetting to check a radio button, or hey, I gave them the wrong permissions or dropped them into the wrong OU in Active Directory, right? These things are going to happen. So instead of trying to sort of regulate any kind of misconfiguration out, focus on the process of continually monitoring for these misconfigurations. So when they happen, you can quickly spot them and remediate them. So misconfiguration risks hide primarily in 4 places. Is file sharing, right? Folks, especially those who are leveraging cloud services, will put something out in their drive and then click anyone with the link can get access to this document. Well, they do mean everyone, right? So where you can avoid things like generic sharing for anyone that has the link, and then instead focus on individuals. Say this person can have access to this document. This person can have it, right? And think about inheritance of permissions, right? If you have permissions at a higher level in the tree, and many times those permissions may go ahead and be inherited down the folder structure, right? So think about that. If you give someone, read access to this folder, consider what's in those subfolders and whether they'll have access to that information as well. Think about your cloud roles, right? We're talking about global admin accounts, right? Or admin groups that tend to just collect people over time, and they never get smaller; they just get bigger, right? Or emergency accounts that have weak passwords or no MFA requirement because it's an emergency, right? When it comes to email and collaboration, right? Auto forwarding, we've talked about quite a bit. Allowing out-of-date authentication mechanisms, right? Legacy or basic authentication still allowed. Guest access, forgetting to turn off guest access. Um, Public meeting links, right? When we're doing these meetings, so it's easy to just make the meeting public and then send it out on an email so everyone can get access. But how do you validate it's only your trusted group that's in the meeting? And around service apps or service accounts and apps, right? Support accounts that are outside of your single sign-on. OAuth applications with mailbox read or API keys that never rotate. None of this is fancy stuff, but it's exploitable stuff, and it's stuff that is kind of routine, right? So we focus a lot on things that don't that are kind of these zebras, right? But we forget to see the things that just are kind of part of the daily process. Right. So when we're talking about how we win, we want to set up guardrails for this. Set your SharePoint or your teams to organization only by default, right? Or require an exception, right? And set time limits on the exceptions, right? So the exceptions don't end up becoming the rule over time. If we're talking about identity, right? So try to get away from permanent administration, right? Do just-in-time elevation of your of those rights to with some sort of automatic expiry, right? So if someone needs extended rights for a period of time for a project, for a function that they're doing, set those rights as a temporary thing with an expiration date. Block auto forwards off your domain, right? And enforce multi-factor authentication. Use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, things like number matching prompts, etc., and disable those old accounts. You want to manage your apps with single sign-on, right? And administrative consent, and revoke stale tokens quarterly, right? Don't leave them out there forever. All right, reset that stuff so that you don't have possibility for folks gaining access and using it for a period of time. And finally, here's a great idea: set aside some time. Right? It doesn't have to be a lot of time. Here we're talking about misconfig Monday. Just set aside 30 minutes, right, to review your shares, to review your group assignments for your guest access, your high risk roles. Right, and just go through them looking for permanent administrative access or things that kind of violate these tenets, right? A little bit of preventative medicine in this way can save you from having a lot of trouble down road when one of those forgotten accounts gets hacked. So let's talk about K-12. Specifically in K-12, it's about sharing, right? So K-12 runs on shared everything. Shared device carts, the shared Windows XP machine that's still running in the closet down the hall that all the teachers use. It's shared classrooms where multiple teachers are in and out of that IT equipment on a daily basis. We shared logins. That were that were made temporary some time ago, but never got made permanent. It's even in the students, right? If you define a hacker, it looks a lot like a young person, right? They're curious, they're tech savvy, and if something like a malicious QR code shows up in the hallway or stuck on somebody's locker, you can bet that one of those kids is scanning it, right? So there's a lot of churn in the K-12. There's a lot of shared spaces. You've got folks coming in and out. You've got parent portals, you've got mass messaging tools, you've got all these sort of outstanding outside public facing applications that are acting with your logo and your trust. So there's a lot of exposure in the K-12 space. We'll contrast that a little bit with the higher ed, where we're seeing issues in higher ed. Right? The big thing with colleges and universities is They are cities with neighborhoods, right? You have the big university, but you have different departments within that university. You've got labs and clinics and auxiliaries that may have, their my air quotes around their IT, right? And that has different setups, different operating systems, different risk appetites, right? But they're all part of the same university. Um, we have research networks and high-performing computing clusters that have completely different rules than, say, the registrar or uh, you know or some other department within the organization. And then student housing Wi-Fi, for example, is basically a small internet service provider running within your own group. So you have all of these sort of decentralized IT enclaves within your environment that don't necessarily share common risk pictures or common baselines for equipment or ports, protocols, and services. So if you throw in things like visiting scholars, adjuncts with short timelines, grad assistants with elevated privileges, and alumni accounts that never die, and you have this sort of like sprawling identity, mess at a large scale, right? And then you confuse it with payment portals, with ticketing systems for football games and concerts and et cetera on the campus. With you have health systems, maybe a hospital, a clinic, or therapy services that have other regulatory or regulated data and third-party risk that sort of uh, blends in with the rest of the university systems, and you have this huge, complex, ever-changing, loosely controlled enterprise that is a monster to govern, right? So a quick win here for higher ed is look for that minimum bar, right? Rather than trying to control each of the departments, set a minimum security bar. You must have multi-factor authentication. You must have logging back 180 days, and you must have, patch windows of 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever the standard is that makes the most sense for you, where every group within the university agrees to it and allows departments to innovate around that. So as long as they meet that minimum standard, they can go above it, or and really sort of retain their independence, but while still meeting that basic security and risk baseline. So I want to be wary of everyone's time here. So we're going to get right into the Smart 8. Right, the Smart 8 aren't fancy tools; they're habits. Right, if all of these are not necessary for you to make improvements, right? So if you do a few of these really, really well, then you're going to reduce the risk of these attacks happening, of a cyber incident impacting your organization. Um, and you can do a lot more as we start progressing, as you pick up more of the defenses, and as you build that 30, 60, and 90-day plan, you can really achieve a lot of these. If we're talking about the first 4 of these Smart 8s, first on the list is one of the hardest lifts, but it's where you're going to see so much improvement, and that's around multi-factor authentication, right? It's again, not an easy lift. It is going to be a sort of a difficult thing, but start on the important stuff. Staff email in your VPNs, SIS, registrar information, financial aid systems, or vendor administration accounts, right? And then turn on things like phishing-resistant MFA or number matching, so the sort of approved spam shenanigans don't work anymore. Second on the list, email security, right? Anti-spoofing, banners to cut off a lot of the drive-bys, and that big red report phish button allows you to really gain a lot of intelligence around what is going on in your organization, what to target for training of users, etc. Patching is number 3 here. It is the maintenance on your drawbridge, right? It is especially important to ensure that critical systems like your VPNs and firewalls, your security equipment, are updated and current, right? If it faces the internet, your patch window should be much, much smaller, right? Because those are the systems that bad guys can reach right from their own keyboards without having to abuse a user, without having to go through somebody else, right? So patch times matter. All of your external facing systems should have the smallest patch windows, and then whatever makes most sense internally, depending on your resources and what you have available. Um, EDR and one-click isolation, that is huge, right? It allows you to sort of manage to take systems out of the equation without taking out everything else, right? And it's how you ensure resilience in the face of attacks. So you can pull out that one system that's misbehaving, leaving everything else clean and unaffected, instead of having to turn off the entire network. Segmentation, let's talk about 5 through 8 here. Ooh, my numbering's off, but imagine these numbers say 5 through 8. The first one there, mini segmentation, right? It is making it more difficult for the bad guys to determine the lay of the land, right? Keeping your student information system, your financial aid systems on separate VLANs in separate IP space that is completely separate and segregated from your other systems, and further segmenting your network to make it more difficult for the bad guys to traverse all of these different systems to get to this to where it matters, the data that they're after. Each one of those shifts that they have to make to find the data is another opportunity for them to slip up and trigger the alarms. So segmentation is important. Flat networks are extremely vulnerable, and so don't do it. Enclave those systems off. Create separation from non-critical systems. Will allow you to protect them in a much better fashion, and also to manage sort of routine and even non-routine cyber attacks where you may be able to isolate them away from your core systems and allow your organization to continue operating in the face of the attacks. Number 6 here, backups. We talk about backup restoration. That is the time machine, right? It lets you go back to a time that before the incident, whatever's occurring, right? Keep copies offline, and by offline I mean literally offline. Immutable backups that exist in a different place. It could be tape backups, it could be warm or soft offsite, or warm or cold offsite storage, someplace where they're disconnected from the online systems so that you can bring them back. And then occasionally testing those backups, making sure that you restore a representative sample of those over time to make sure that they're viable. Number 7 is least privilege. That is a concept where you only give folks the rights and privileges that they need to accomplish their job, right? And when they need enhanced privileges, whether it's for a specific project or a task that they need to do, put a timer on those privileges so they automatically expire after a certain time, right? Don't make them a super user today and then forget about it, and then 2 years from now they're still walking around with these administrative privileges. Make those things temporary so that they can revert back to only the privileges that they need at that time later on when they no longer need them. And number 8 here is logging, right? Logging is super important. A lot of times you don't really know what happened that led up to some sort of condition that your systems are in without looking at the logs to understand, hey, what happened at this time and the events that occurred leading up to whatever is there. So hold on to 90 to 180 days of activity from your big platforms, right? Your Microsoft, your Google, et cetera. That way, when you have something that occurs, you can refer back to those logs and kind of divine what occurred so that you can make appropriate decisions around remediation and recovery. So those are 8 real simple things that you can do right out of the gate to start increasing your cybersecurity posture, reducing the risk to your data, etc. Let's take a look here on vendors. We've talked a lot about it, but I want to hit on one important feature here, and that is contracting, written agreements, right? Our strongest security tool that we might have is a document signed by both sides, right? That contract. Feel free to ask for things like multi-factor authentication for vendor admins, single sign-on, avoiding things like shared support accounts, so you're not going into a basket with thousands of emails. That you have access logs that go back long enough to be useful, and some sort of service level agreement around notification of breaches or cyber incidents, right? So that you can be assured, hey, when something goes sideways, they're going to call you in a reasonable amount of time. Let's hit on the incident response for a second. We've alluded to it a little bit earlier in the session. We're talking about remediating things, recovering. When we're talking about backups, let's talk about the actual incident response process itself. First thing on the list is that you absolutely need an incident response plan. If you don't have one, think about getting one. Now is a perfect time to start, right? The plan should have authority and rules for the team. It should name the team. It should absolutely lay out the process by which the team will evaluate, validate, and then respond to attacks and cyber incidents of all types. In the first bit of an incident response, the plan is most important, right? So it's all about, first, who is in charge, right? That should be in your incident response plan. Who is your incident manager? In that so opening minutes of the incident, when the incident response team gets spun up, it's about identifying what's sick and validating that something is actually sick. Many times, we kind of get message that something happened in the network, and all of these things are potentially exploited, and then after a little bit of research, you find out, it's just the patching group sent out the wrong thing, or dropped a patch on the wrong OU, and we start getting error messages, right? So the first thing is validate what's going on, isolate what's sick. And it's about keeping the receipts, right? It's documentation. The incident response team's primary purpose is to stop the attack. Their secondary purpose is to document everything that happened from the spin up to the after action report. And the last thing that the plan should set up is successful communications, both internally and externally from the organization, right? It's setting the communications cadence so that people have an expectation of when they will be getting information, right? So, initially, you're going to look to isolate individual systems, right? Mitigate the damage as much as you possibly can. Avoid things like shutting the entire school down if you don't have to, right? That's the purpose of that validation step. Get an initial scope, figure out what's going on, and remediate, isolate that attack to the degree that you can. When we're talking about communications is where most incident response goes off the rails, right? Start with something very generic and very plain English, right? Where something has occurred, we're unaware of the source of our current cyber issues. We are investigating. We will be, remediating, restoring in stages. We'll provide more updates, insert time then. And keep that promise, right? Set the cadence and then keep it. And that is going to engender so much goodwill towards you, because folks will be getting information that is non-speculative, that is clear and concise. And even if you don't have any additional information to give, if you come back routinely as you say, hey, next update in 6 hours, and you come back in 6 hours and give them an update, the message that sends to everyone involved is that this organization knows what's going on, they're keeping us in the loop, they have it under control. In the first day, it's all about restoring what matters in the order that matters, right? it's like air traffic control, right? You want to land the planes with the lowest fuel first. In this particular case, you want to get the systems that matter the most to you up first, and then sequentially after that. So first thing, identity and email, because everything relies on your authentication identity systems and your email systems, right? If email and identity management don't work, nothing else works. Then focus on your core critical systems, student information system, registrar system, financial aid systems, all of those things you need for the school to operate. And then worry about things like phones, like payroll, that sort of thing, so people can work and get back to normal. As I said, as you go through this, publish predictable updates, right? Same time every day. Simple, concise, uncomplicated language. Avoid speculation. Only talk about facts. If your folks know what's coming next, you slow that rumor mill down, right? Everybody recognizes, hey, something's going on. The organization has a handle on it. They're keeping us in the loop. I don't have to worry about it, right? It's lane by lane recovery. So once you get back to a stable position, you want to change your approach. You want to make sure that you're documenting that timeline of what happened and what you did at each point. That is hugely important. I wish I could bold it and make it multicolored on the screen. Documentation will save your life in incident response. So make sure you're keeping that simple timeline of what happened and what you did. Timestamp each of those entries and tell, hey, at this time, incident response team did this. Notify who you must, right? Almost all states, I think all 50 states, have some form of data breach notification law. Know what that law is and how that applies to you. Notify those folks in compliance with the laws. Give them plain English, non-speculative, concise facts so that they can take appropriate action if necessary to protect themselves. Identify what that one step that you could have done to break the chain of events that led to the breach. Fix that so that it won't happen again, and then practice your response over and over again. Right? We mentioned tabletops earlier. These are an important way for your organization to test your incident response capabilities. So think about that maybe on an annual basis in conjunction with maybe your annual cyber training, for example. Bring the incident response team together, create a scenario, run through the scenario, test your team's ability to function, whether the plan works, and make alterations as necessary. And just continue to work that plan until it's sort of routine. It's just built into muscle memory. That way, when something occurs, you are in a great position to respond quickly and effectively. So mini tabletop. Here's a quick example, like a super condensed tabletop exercise, just to kind of give you an idea of what the purpose is. Right? As long as you approach the events in these scenarios with a desire to, genuinely go through the process to identify weaknesses and get through the scenario, you're going to find areas of improvement where your incident response team, process and team can get better, right? And that's going to give you peace of mind that your processes work, or an opportunity to experience that, hey, they're going to fall apart in certain scenarios, and how do we fix that? Right. So in this particular case, there's a 7:15 a.m. on the first day of the period where you can add and drop classes, a few staff reports, MFA prompts, the registrar's portal is sluggish, some help desk tickets say the parents can't log in, etc. Right. And there's this this scenario that is laid out, and then in the team's focus is in the next 120 seconds. Right. Identify the incident lead, get them set up, set the lanes, right? Start creating that restoration list, right? What is most important to get back and when, find out about the scope of the incident, validate what happened and what's impacted and how you can contain that. And then start drafting that initial messages. Hey, we're investigating a cybersecurity issue and restoring services, etc. Right? This is just a really brief example of what that looks like. But in your tabletop, you would write a whole scenario that is sort of time-based, and you would walk through that scenario with your whole team as if it were actually happening in real time. And the benefit of that is you're going to get halfway through it and find out that something in your plan doesn't work well. You'll be like, okay, I'm gonna document that in my notes, and we're going to come back and fix that later, right? And that tabletop exercise is just paid for itself. So I would definitely recommend doing that on a regular basis. It's tremendously effective, and you'll get some great benefit from it. Just a quick plug here for PTAC, the Privacy Technical Assistance Center. That's us here at the department. We are a privacy and cybersecurity resource for you, our education family out there in the field. Please feel free to reach out to us. Our goal is to turn privacy and security into things that you can actually do to help you kind of make sense of the FERPish and the policy language that can sometimes be confusing. And we do a lot of things to create documents and resources, checklists, model terms of service, that sort of thing that you can leverage in your own processes in your own organizations. We try to minimize things like buzzwords. We are a safe resource. You can come and talk to us. We're not about enforcement on the PTAC side of the house. We are a TA resource for you. We're technical assistants. So come and ask us the questions. You don't have to be ashamed. We're not going to go tell anyone. Our goal is to help you maintain the privacy and security of your systems. So feel free to reach out to us. We would love to help you. We also provide training, and this QR code, which we just talked about, malicious QR code, so rest assured this one's not malicious, will take you to that link right there, studentprivacy.ed.gov, where you can request PTAC training. And we'll come out to your site or provide courses such as this webinar session that you're in now to your staff. And it's all free of charge. Again, our job here is to be a resource for you. So please reach out to us. Now, as promised, let's talk about a 30, 60, 90-day plan, right? The purpose of this plan is to break this overwhelming burden of security into some short sprints that show visible progress, right? And the idea here is that sometimes it's hard for leadership to kind of get into the security bubble, right? Because things seem to take a long time, and a lot of times, how do you prove that something didn't happen, right? So this is all about taking quick action, getting some wins on the board in a way that's provable, that shows value, and that really moves that needle towards security. So in the first 30 days, it's all about locking the doors and testing your ability to recover, right? So turning on multi-factor authentication and your VPN, your virtual private network, right, to protect your initial your login activities and to make sure that your data is encrypted when you're off campus or off in a coffee shop or traveling or in the airport or at home, etc. Make sure you set your DMARC to quarantine so obvious fakes have a warning label on them that when they come into the system. And then just pick one system that matters, whether that's email, whether that's the registrars, whether that's, pick one that's mission critical, and try to restore it from a backup. Do a drill. Just see if you can restore that one critical system from a backup. Once you're certain that works, that's a huge win for you, right? We have the ability to back up these systems in the case that there's an emergency. And add one sentence to your finance standard operating procedure: no bank account changes without a phone call to a known number, right? Some sort of validation step so that you don't just have one request and someone changes the bank account or financial data, right? That there's some sort of like two-person integrity to that change so that you can validate that it is a legitimate request. In the 30 days, that's a lot of wins, right? If you can put up one or two of those up on the board, that is a provable increase in your risk avoidance and a great win for your cybersecurity program. Let's talk a little bit further down the road. By 60 days, right? You're separating up the hallways, and you're looking to make sure that you can isolate and get your arms around things faster. right? So put your student information system, put your finance or your student aid on a different network or different VLAN from your student services, your guest Wi-Fi, your IoT devices that are throughout your campus, right? Segregate and create secure enclaves for your critical systems. Roll out your EDR so you can isolate sick machines with one click, right? So that when something goes wrong on that machine, you can instantly pull that machine off the network while leaving the other neighboring machines alone, so that you can, in that way, be resilient to attacks and continue to operate in the face of one or two or several machines going down. And consider adding a vendor addendum with 3 lines that everyone understands, right? Single sign-on only, multi-factor for vendor administrations, and a service level agreement about breach notification within 72 hours. That's 3 days, right? That's not too much to ask. If the vendor suspects that there's an incident or a breach, they should be able to notify you within 3 days. And for 60 days, that's a pretty good win, right? You've shown, again, measurable improvements. You've segregated your network. You've distanced your sensitive and mission critical machines from the rest of your network. You've increased your ability to quickly isolate attacks, so you don't have to drop entire VLANs or shut off the entire network. You can isolate one individual involved machine and drop it from the network. And that you've addressed some of your vendor questions by shoring up things, by saying, hey, we need you to fall under our single sign-on. We need you to implement multi-factor authentication for your vendor admins, and getting that SLA around breach notification. Those are big wins. So let's push it out now from 60 to 90 days. Here's where we're kind of burning in everything, right? We're going to run a tabletop exercise. Right? Make sure your incident response programs are working. Find those kinks in the plan. Find the areas that need improvement and improve them. Review the forever admins, right? Look for ways to reduce the number of administrative access accounts you have in your environment. And look to switch to just-in-time access for those who still require occasional administrative access, so that they can escalate their privileges for a short time to accomplish a task and then get reduced back to what they need for their everyday work. Centralize your sign-in and activity logs. Collate them so that you can easily access 90 to 180 days, so that you have the receipts in case something goes bumped in the night. You can point to the kind of trail of events that led up to it. And lastly, take the time to celebrate people who report the weird emails, who take action, who provide you with assurance that, hey, when something goes wrong, our staff, is right there to report it, and they do the right thing around security. And celebrate those people. Create that community of security with rewards and praise rather than simply abusing or shaming those who fail to do the right thing, right? Reward the folks who reported the weird emails rather than just beating up on the folks who accidentally clicked the link. So we ran through the 30, 60, 90. You see kind of the intent there. It doesn't have to be those exact steps for your organization, but it's a great example for you to take your own organization and kind of dive into that. Identify those areas where, hey, where can we make some big improvements in 30 days? And then start out with those guys. Get the momentum going. And then think, okay, what's next on the list? We can do it in the next 30 days after that. And then, maybe after that, you find out some more things that you can add to get to that 90-day point. But in each of those sprints, you're working towards a common goal, and you have some big wins at the end. So think about using that framework to create an incremental improvement in your cybersecurity program where you are. Let's talk a little bit about resources and services that you can get access to. Of course, PTAC at the U.S. Department of Education, that's us. We're under the Student Privacy Policy Office, or SPPO. You're going to get FERPA-aligned guidance, a ton of resources on our website. You're going to get model language, checklists, and we can do, of course, custom technical assistance or training that you can request that we can give you on any subject related to student privacy or cybersecurity. Please don't be a stranger. We're a free resource for you to use, and if we don't have resources or knowledge directly, we connect with a ton of federal agencies and resources out there in the education community. We can connect you with those resources. So please consider reaching out to us. Even if you don't have an incident or something critical, you can find a lot of great resources on our website. CISA is another great place. The CISA is loaded with prevention best practices, response checklists, K-12 specific ransomware advisories and references. So great tools that you can use there. The FCC, and a whole bunch of other resources that you see here on the screen. These are some, government and also, civilian organizations that have tons of resources aimed around student privacy and cybersecurity. Another thing you can do is sign up for our newsletter here at PTAC. We promise we're not going to spam you. We use this newsletter to push out advisories around things that are happening in cybersecurity and student privacy. And you'll get early notification of all the great resources that are coming out of PTAC on a regular basis. So it's a great place. On that link that you see on your screen right now, you can get to the subscribe page. You can do it right through the main page on our website. Just follow the links. And I recommend it. We won't spam you, and you'll get a lot of great information through there. Join the tens of thousands of other folks that are getting that hot off the presses PTAC information. With that said, let me give you some contact information. Again, I know we've been through a lot together in this last session. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. And please, if you have questions about this session or anything around student privacy or data security, contact us here at the Privacy Technical Assistance Center. There's our phone number on the screen. We have an email address, privacyta@ed.gov, that you can use to contact us as well. And down there is our website, studentprivacy.ed.gov. Again, that's studentprivacy.ed.gov. That's where most people get a hold of us. And on that website, you're going to find all the great resources we talked about, some free FERPA training, a host of videos around a variety of topics on FERPA, compliance and student privacy and data security and cybersecurity best practices. So definitely take a visit if you haven't been to our website. And with that, I will say again, thank you so much for joining us today. We love talking to our education family about important subjects such as this, and look to the future where we will be doing more of these webinar series on a quarterly basis. So thanks again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.